podcast you're about to hear is true. The names have not been changed to protect the innocent, the guilty, or anyone else. If you're interested in the same type of discussion related to organized crime that you hear in the traditional media, stop listening now. If you're interested in thinking differently or learning something, turn up the volume on your computer, smartphone, or mobile device. This is The Racket Report. Here's Frank Morano.
Welcome to The Racket Report. This is Frank Morano. This is the podcast that tries to take you inside the world of organized crime, past, present, and future. And boy, oh boy, are we in for a treat today, because my guest is not only a Pulitzer Prize-winning author and journalist, but he has written not just the book, but many books that have become the defining history of the mob. If you're talking about modern day mob figures like John Gotti, Vinny the Chin Gigante, Vincent Asaro, you name it, he's the man. If you're talking about historical mafia figures like Frank Costello, he's also the man. He has done an incredible job chronicling mob history from the 1930s until the present day. And his latest book, everybody is talking about, it's hot off the presses, Broadway Butterfly, Vivian Gordon, the Lady Gangster of Jazz Age New York. How do you have a lady gangster in an era that is known for, among other things, sexism? Tony DeStefano explains it in vivid detail in this book. Very pleased to welcome the author of the book, Broadway Butterfly, Tony DeStefano. Tony, it's great to talk to you again, my friend.
It's great to talk to you, and thank you for that nice send-up.
Tony, for people that aren't aware of your history, you've clearly covered both for Newsday and for, in your own books, a lot of different crime cases, a lot of different mafia cases. You're able to write about mobsters, gangsters, mafia cases in a way that's incredibly readable, although very fact dense. People may not know this, but you have a law degree of your own. How did you get to this point in your life? Most of the journalists that I talk to, most of the authors that write about the mob don't have a law degree. How did you get to this point in your career and in your life?
Well, I guess, I got to this point by, I was a GI overseas in the Vietnam era. I came back, and after knocking around, I figured I would go to law school. I went at night, and I supported myself by working as a journalist for what was then Fairchild News Service, which produced, among other things, Women's Wear Daily. And we got into the mob because we did a series of stories about the mob on 7th Avenue in the Garment District. And it was since then that I got sort of ensnared, if you will, with the mob. Mob stories, mob history, mob characters, and the never-ending tapestry that goes on with a mob. So that, in a nutshell, is how it happened. And I've stayed with, I didn't practice law, I haven't. I've stayed with journalism because, well, frankly, it's been a lot of fun. It's been a good ride. And I think it probably, on balance, seeing what goes on in the law business, is probably a better way to go.
One of the things that I've always been impressed with you is you're able to talk to everybody. You're able to cultivate everybody as sources, certainly folks in law enforcement, but those are sources for everybody. There are a lot of underworld sources that don't typically make a habit of talking to the press that seem to enjoy talking to you and are widely quoted in your books and in your journalism in general. How do you manage that? That's a pretty neat trick.
Well, it's not easy because you've got to get the confidence of people, and you got to start off in some ways. You got to keep people confidential, but over time, people begin to open up, and they feel comfortable with saying certain things, and then you have to be very careful with what you do. And you got to cultivate sources, and you got to keep confidences. But at times that works to your advantage because people say, "Hey, I can trust this guy," and he's not out to screw me, and he wants to get the straight story. So they talk.
This is the first time that we've spoken, at least on radio or in podcast form, since Vincent Asaro has passed away. You wrote the book on the Lufthansa heist, really the definitive book, much more up to date, much more well versed than the book that Goodfellas is based on, to be honest. It's called The Big Heist, and you have the real story of the Lufthansa heist, the mafia, and murder. Very famously, Vincent Asaro was put back on trial for the Lufthansa heist decades after it occurred. He was acquitted. He died in October. For folks that are unfamiliar with Vincent Asaro, who the New York Post dubbed the last good fella on its front page, what can you tell us about Vincent Asaro and his mob legacy?
Well, Vinny Asaro, at least for part of his life, was sort of a high echelon guy, associate of Gotti, and he was in the Bonanno crime family, and he was doing okay for a while, but he got, the demons got to him, drink, I'm sure some possibly narcotics, and he sort of slid down the road. He sort of slid off the precipice, as it were, and became sort of disfavored in the mob. He wasn't earning that much money, and certainly after Lufthansa, things were erratic with him. And he kind of was knocking around and was the last guy standing, like you said, of the Lufthansa crew, and got indicted many, many years later in a case that everybody thought was going to be the quintessential Lufthansa case. In fact, turned out to be a big bust because he got acquitted. And he got acquitted, I think, because of very adroit defense work, and also because the key witness, his cousin, Gaspar Valente, had baggage of his own. He probably didn't appeal to the jurors because he was turning on his cousin, and he was frankly, in it for the money because he needed a grub stake, right, to support himself. So I think the dynamics in that case were against the government, and Vinny got acquitted. And he was surprised and shocked like many people. And then he lived his life, and I had to do the book, of course, and I had to track him down. I did track him down, and I found him at a home in Ozone Park where he was living with his then girlfriend, very nice woman. And that was one of these interviews where you don't think you're going to get it, but you do. It's very short enough, though, to give me some stuff to sort of bookend the book. In which he told me, I can't talk to you. But he then went on a tirade against the government and, professed his innocence. And it sort of made the story in the end because it was, it was the end of a tough life. He was good in the mob up to a point, but then he fell off the cliff.
No doubt about it. I can imagine. All right, let's talk about your new book. It takes place with the backdrop of Jazz Age New York. I think anybody who's, even paid a little bit of attention to this era knows that this era was defined culturally, criminally, and societally by Prohibition and everything that emerged from Prohibition. Before we get into discussing Vivian Gordon, talk to me about Prohibition in this era and what it meant for the rackets, what it meant for the mob. It's always been portrayed as being a big moneymaker for the rackets and for the mob. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. The mob before this, the sort of combines you had in New York, mostly Italian Americans, but some Jewish and Irish gangsters, was kind of like sort of headbreakers. But with Prohibition, they saw the opportunity, and these guys who were really knockabout guys suddenly became supercharged because Prohibition, everybody wanted booze, right? Everybody wanted a drink, and they fed into the market. They were able to smuggle product from overseas. They were able to do all sorts of stuff and produce it as well. And it made the mob a lot of money. Guys like Frank Costello, other gangsters who are, not necessarily Italians, were making a lot of money for that period. You're talking tens of millions of dollars deposited in bank accounts. So for that period, that's a lot. And what this did was supercharge the mob. It gave them a large reserve of funding, which they were then able to parlay in the post-Prohibition era into other things, including political influence, by the way, because, politicians like bees, to honey, gravitate towards money. And for this, the mob was able to, get the perpetual favors done because they had the money to pay off politicians and attract politicians. And it also, funded other rackets, slot machines, other gambling ventures, loan sharking, God knows what else, but it was really the thing that took the mob well into the 20th century. Prohibition was. And that's, in some sense, why we had the mob that we have today.
Yeah, in terms of paying off politicians, that's a big backdrop. The intersection between the criminal world and Tammany Hall is a big backdrop of this book. Who was Vivian Gordon and what made you want to write about her? I have to be honest, before I read your book, I didn't even know who she was. How did you know who she was and what interested you about her?
Well, because I was doing work on Prohibition and came, for some of the mob books, and I came across her story as almost like a footnote and her murder in 1931. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I never heard of this woman, but let me put it aside. I came back to it, and I started looking at the clips about that period and her homicide. And it was an explosive story. We may not know about her, for the moment today, but that story took off like a tabloid gold mine. It was in the New York Times. It was in the Daily News. It was in England. It was in Canada. It was all over the country. Her murder and subsequent events were the story of the day. And it really galvanized the cops in New York to solve the case, and also really led to disenchantment with Mayor Jimmy Walker at the time, because everybody saw the murder of Vivian, who was trying to cooperate with law enforcement, as something that was endemic, showed the endemic nature of gangsterism in New York City at the time. Don't forget, this is Prohibition, right? You had a lot of big names floating around. You had Legs Diamond. You had Arnold Rothstein. You have Vonnie Williams not Williams, but the Irish gangster of the period, and other Italian guys who were coming up. So it was an interesting period, and it all intersected together in this web of corruption, prohibition, bootlegging, and sexual extortion, which Vivian was really sort of a master at.
Americans love using their credit cards, the most secure and hassle-free way to pay. But D.C. politicians want to change that with the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill. This bill lets corporate megastores pick how your credit card is processed, allowing them to use untested payment networks that jeopardize your data security and rewards. Corporate megastores will make more money, and you pay the price. Tell Congress to guard your card, because Americans lose when politicians choose. Learn more at guardyourcard.com.
So obviously a big part of her empire was the fact that alcohol was illegal. Where was her speakeasy? How did she get her start in serving illegal liquor?
Well, what she did, she had a stable of women who were, attractive. Probably some were trying to make it on Broadway and or other lines to work. And they would entice men to go out with them. Some of this was sexual. Most of these guys were compromised because they were married and had, families and other relationships, and they were easy targets for extortionate demands. And if you want to keep this secret, you got to, help us pay some money, jewelry, and the women plied this trade very, very readily. And Vivian was sort of at the top of the heap, and she had the stable of women who were going out and recruiting men. Often refer to them through cab drivers, simply enough. And booze was a factor because everybody was consorting with these women at speakeasies and salons that they had where liquor was served. She also had a connection to the famous Judge Crater, who availed himself of her women. And I don't know if it was sexual or not, but odds on it probably was. And that was right before he disappeared. And so he would attend events at her apartment. And that's one of the sort of tantalizing mysteries in the book, which is described to some extent because there's some theory about what happened to Crater. But I digress. Vivian was at the top.
Yeah, go ahead.
She was at the top.
Is there speculation that she may have had a role in Judge Crater's disappearance?
No, it seems that, the quick answer is no. She was, Crater disappeared in 1930, and Vivian was murdered in early 1931. There was never anything developed about her being a person of interest in his disappearance. He did know her. She knew him. The theory that's been bandied about, and this is crazy when I found it in doing the research, was that there was a guy on death row who had a story told to him by the gangster who was accused of killing Vivian about what really happened to Judge Crater. Apparently he welched on a deal, extortion deal, not extortion, but a bribery scheme where he was supposed to do something in a criminal case or get something done, and he wouldn't give the money back, and he was kidnapped, and even after being kidnapped, he wouldn't get the money back, and the story goes that he was then taken out to Jersey and murdered, and his body disposed of in the river. This was reported in 1956 in a story that the former death row inmate, who was released, by the way, because this case got overturned, revealed. The story created a flash, but nothing ever since. And I don't think you can ever really prove what happened.
Yeah. So in the case of Vivian Gordon and how she became such a big shot in that era, it wasn't just the fact that she was serving illegal liquor. It wasn't just the fact that she was running or participating in a prostitution ring. This was a sex extortion ring, basically, that she was running.
That's right. Yeah, as I think I mentioned earlier, the women would get the men into situations that compromise them, and to then, the demand was, hey, you want to keep this secret or out of the newspapers or whatever, you got to come across with money or jewelry or something. And that's how it worked. It was a very simple sort of scheme in one sense. You got some private matter that you don't want disclosed, and you're really willing to pay to keep it private. To any extent. And this was sort of common in the period. It wasn't, exclusive to Vivian, but she did it in a way where she got a lot of money. I mean, she was able to invest in real estate and some other business ventures, and became in that field a player.
In terms of how much money you can make doing what she was doing, are there any accurate estimates of about how much money she was making at the height of her power?
They're all estimates. Some say it was, maybe $1 million a year. How do you document that? You can't really. We do know that she invested in real estate in parts of the city. I think Brooklyn was one spot. She also had other business ventures she went in with other sort of associates who was questionable, including lawyers. So we're talking tens of thousands of dollars. So to put that money aside and invest it, she had to be making a lot more than that. And she also lived nicely. She had a nice apartment in Manhattan, and it was nicely turned out. But she had all sorts of crazy demons, drug use, alcohol, and she had this obsession with getting back custody of her daughter, who she lost custody of because she got arrested in an earlier prostitution case, and was scheming to do all sorts of things to try to get her back. She never did, but that's also part of the tragedy, because the daughter committed suicide as well after the mother was killed.
As best as you understand it, did Vivian Gordon ever have a non-criminal job, or was her the way she made her living always through some sort of illicit means?
Yeah, she was an aspiring actress. right. This is this broad category of aspiration, right? She was an aspiring actress and dancer, and she did perform, and I found records of that, with the Schubert Organization in a show program they had in 1914, where she was, well, I wouldn't say a bit player, but she was part of the chorus in certain shows. And so she did have some, legitimate work. She was doing modeling, but then she got ensnared in a prostitution arrest, for which she said was a put-up job, was a fake job. She wasn't really doing anything, but it was a setup, she said. But she got convicted nonetheless. And the courts at that time, if you were a woman in New York, and if you looked at a vice cop halfway cockeyed, you were going to get arrested, even if you didn't look at them cockeyed, because they had this massive scheme in the police department among vice detectives to get women ensnared in vice cases, prostitution, and then shake them down. And this was true not only for the cops, but also for people in the DA's office and also in the court system. So there was this giant racket. And Vivian says she was grabbed as a victim of this, and that's why she wanted to cooperate with law enforcement, and which she did until the very end.
You, as I alluded to earlier, have covered a lot of prominent traditional organized crime figures of this period, people like Vito Genovese and Frank Costello. Did she rub elbows with any of those guys? I would think there would be an interest in the part of the what we'll call the conventional mob in getting a piece of Vivian Gordon's action. Was that the case?
Well, from what I was able to find, she didn't rub elbows or shoulders with any of the noted Italian guys you just mentioned. Costello had, he had different operations, and I don't think he really liked that kind of vice. He was a gambling guy, and he tried to have an air of legitimacy. She was tied into Legs Diamond, who was one of the big racketeers of the period. She is also said to have had a connection with Arnold Rothstein, Mr. Fix-It, the guy who... man
that fixed the World Series.
Right, the World Series, and labor situations and political situations, and until he was murdered. And he was a guy who, bankrolled a lot of the mob, and he may have bankrolled her to some extent. But her connection was more... Legs Diamond and this Irish gangster, Vonnie Higgins, who was a major bootlegger of the period. Like many of them, he was murdered eventually. But she had her connections. The Italians, not so much from what we can see. But she was in the scene. And when you're in that prohibition scene with the speakeasies and the illicit liquor and the women, you're gonna come up against and cooperate with these guys.
As you alluded to her murder, what do we know about the circumstances surrounding her death? I know her murder has remained unsolved to this day, but surely there's a lot of speculation about why she was killed and by whom.
Yeah, by 1931, early 1931, there was an investigation begun, sparked by then Governor Franklin Roosevelt, into the magistrate court system. And this is the court system I alluded to earlier, where the women were often victimized as extortion victims of themselves in prostitution cases. And they were set up. So there was a big hearing, a lot of publicity. It was run by this guy, Samuel Seabury, a blue blood from an Episcopal clergy background. And Vivian, of course, saw that the investigation was going on. And she said, hey, I had my case, and I believe I was set up by the cops and framed. So let me talk to Seabury. And she did. She talked to his staff in early February of 1931. And they said, okay, this is all very good. We need some more information. We need some more documentation. And she said, okay, I'll get you some. she never returned. She never returned because early the morning of February 26, 1931, she was found strangled and bludgeoned in Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx, tossed on the side of the road like a sack of garbage. And she was found, and they made the connection easily, the cops did, between her and the Seabury Commission. And that's when the big hue and cry started about Jimmy Walker. You got to do something. The gangsters are running the town. Look, they're killing witnesses. And then to top it off, Vivian's daughter, a young girl, 16, her name was Benita, killed herself because of all the negative publicity and the horror she was facing about her mother's life and past. So it all cascaded, and it cascaded and kept cascading around Jimmy Walker, who was losing favor with a lot of the reformists in the city who weren't happy with the gangster culture. And the fact that Jimmy, in fact, liked bootlegging. He liked speakeasies. He liked liquor. And he was a party guy. We've seen that in some other iterations recently. But, and he whenever things got rough, he went on a vacation. He went on a vacation to Europe, and he extolled the virtues of beer and champagne. So you could see where his head was at. It wasn't behind a desk in City Hall necessarily. It was in this whole jazz age mystique, which was part and parcel of Prohibition. So, people said, hey, we're kind of fed up with Walker. We got to do something about this. And there were more investigations. And ultimately, that all led to Walker's resignation in 1932, because he saw the writing on the wall.
So the publicity from the murder of Vivian Gordon actually helped this domino effect go along, which ultimately led to Jimmy Walker resigning. And if folks are unfamiliar with Jimmy Walker and the Seabury hearings, you can see a terrific musical which deals a little bit with this called Fiorello, because it does parallel the rise of the political career of Fiorello LaGuardia. As far as we know, did Walker himself have a direct relationship with Vivian Gordon, or was it just that type of culture that Walker was so associated with?
It was a culture Walker was associated with. As far as we know, he didn't have any connection to Vivian. Look, they could have been in the same speakeasy at some time, but we don't know that. Walker used to go to casinos and speakeasies quite regularly, and if she was around, well, they would have seen each other. But it was more of the culture that Walker was involved in that sort of coalesced around what she was doing, and there was no active connection. In fact, when she was murdered, Walker, tasked the police with solving the case, which they thought they did. It was a big dragnet. There was a big investigation, many detectives involved, pulling out all the stops. And the police commissioner at the time even did some spade work himself, talked to one of Frank Costello's associates who was big in the jewelry industry and knew a lot of fences and stuff, who provided some information, which helped lead to the arrest of this guy, Harry Stein. I'm not throwing some names at you, but Harry Stein was the guy who was believed to have been the murderer of Vivian Gordon. And they went to trial. The cops thought they had this case locked up. Well, the old story, and you've been around long enough to know when you think you have a case locked up, sometimes reality sets in and things don't go that way. And Stein was acquitted. He had a very good defense attorney. And again, there was one witness. It was a one witness kind of case. And I guess maybe the jury didn't like the witness who was cut. You're
talking about Harry Schlitten.
Harry Schlitten. There you go. Another name, right? Another Harry. They weren't wild about Harry. And everybody was stunned by the verdict. And the police were disheartened. and bitter DA in the Bronx, of course. And but that's the way it goes. Stein, the main suspect, got nabbed several years later in an armed car robbery, homicide, in which the driver was killed. He got sent to prison, got the death penalty in New York State in 1950, and for 5 years fought the case all the way to the Supreme Court. But in the end, they ruled against him, and he was executed not long after that. And him and two others, in fact. And that's what happened. And that was like the sweet bit of karma for I guess, for Vivian and her allies at that point. You know, Harry Stein got his comeuppance. And, Vivian, Vivian, I think I mentioned this in the book in detail. Vivian was buried in an unmarked grave up in Westchester, Mount Hope Cemetery. And I found the grave with some doing, because if you're looking for an unmarked grave, it takes a little bit of effort. And I looked at the grave, and it's unmarked, and I said, she's a person of interest in New York State history, not a major player, but she had some role in events in the Prohibition and Jazz age. And here she is, a murder victim in an unmarked grave. So I've decided, and I'm doing this on my own, to get a marker placed on her grave up there. And eventually it will happen, or perhaps sometime soon. So that's my little bit of, I guess.
No, that's terrific. It's a great contribution to history. And from now on, if folks go to Mount Hope Cemetery in Hastings-on-Hudson, they will be able to find Vivian Gordon's grave. Good for you. That's terrific.
Yeah, eventually. It hasn't happened yet, but it will. I've got the wheels in motion. It takes a little bit of effort, but it's happening.
So I guess
the least I could do.
Yeah. Well, she gave you such a great book. Absolutely. Between the murder of Vivian Gordon, you have the forced resignation, really, of Jimmy Walker. And I mentioned the ascendancy of the reform movement with Fiorello LaGuardia as mayor. You alluded to the fact that FDR started this whole removal process of Gentleman Jimmy Walker. And I'm wondering if you think that Roosevelt's rise to prominence on the national scene was helped, at least in part, to his smashing of the Tammany Hall movement.
I think it was. I think that there was enough of a groundswell, not only in New York City, but I think nationally, against Tammany and its long corrosive influence, that it helped. What Roosevelt did help. Now he had to tread a very careful line here, because Tammany was his part and parcel of his Democratic base in New York, and he had to do things in a way where he wasn't that heavy-handed. He gave Walker some rope to play with in terms of giving his explanation for the way things were. But in the end, Jimmy was taking money from people doing business with the city. Now, he says it wasn't bribes, but it really left a bad feeling with a lot of people. And Roosevelt said at one point, he said, look, if a government official can't explain how he gets the money, apart from his salary or government compensation, you're going to have a problem. Because there were a lot of cops around, by the way, who were getting scads of money, and they couldn't account for it. They had salaries like $3,000-$4,000 maybe a year, but they couldn't account for the tens and thousands of dollars and hundreds of thousands of dollars in real estate that they had. So that became something that Roosevelt keyed to. And I guess people really went along with that, because in the end, Walker lost all the support and was told in the end, with all the support gone, that Jim, you're through, by his main political allies, and he knew he had to leave. So in September of 1932, he left.
You write a little bit about Vivian Gordon's sister, Arnalda. What became of her?
We don't know. I tried to track her. I know she's deceased. She corresponded with the sister when she was alive, and revealed that her sister, her time in prison, Vivian's time in prison, was a time that hardened her. She was in association with a lot of other women at the Bedford Women's Facility who were harder criminals, and she learned some of the ropes, so she says. Arnolda died. I don't have the exact date in front of me, but she died. There was another sister who also passed away, and her brother, who actually buried her in Mount Hope, also passed away. That's what happened. And Vivian's ex-husband, he's also gone, and so is her daughter. So there's really nobody left.
I mentioned that before your book came out, I had never heard of Vivian Gordon. I'm wondering why that's the case. She was clearly one of the most prominent madams of that era, and so much more of that. More than that, the mysterious cases of her death were tabloid fodder, not just in New York, but nationally. Why has history, at least until your book, has history not really remembered her, where we still talk about and remember folks like Judge Crater?
Well, that's a good question. I've thought about that. I found out about her almost by accident, and then I decided to write the book. I think just because there's so much in the sweep of mob history and crime history that us characters come in and they supplant what went on before. She was not the she was not the media darling like, say, Polly Adler was, the famous madam. She had her own situation, and she was murdered, yes. But then again, there were a lot of murders in the period. So I think that's just the way history goes. You'll be remembered for your 15 minutes, and she certainly was. And there have been stories since then about her. You look at the newspapers, there's plenty of stories. But they're episodic. They're now and again stories. And until, I did the book, I guess it hasn't been any kind of major story trying to put it all together. It's really a story about the era in which Vivian's life is the framework in which to talk about prohibition, Tammany Hall, the Jazz Age, and old New York. And that's the fascinating part about it. You're able to weave history around her life, which is ironic because, as we noted, she was in an unmarked grave, at least for the moment. And people, don't really remember her.
It is such an interesting era, and it's still an era that so many people are fascinated with. That run up to the Great Depression is really a defining moment, not just in New York history or criminal history, but in American history. Has there ever been an interesting or good movie about Vivian Gordon? I would think she's just a perfect cinematic character.
Well, I think her life story is a good cinematic character. Her daughter's, story is also, and the people she was involved with in this era, Lace Diamond, Rothstein, Bonnie Higgins, Jimmy Walker's story is also part of the story arc. It's really a separate arc, but there's a lot here to that. And it is a cinematic story in some ways. I've seen it that way. I think if anybody wants to do a different kind of overarching story about Jazz Age New York in the era of Prohibition, mixing all the politics in, this is a great vehicle.
No doubt about it. It reads like a New York version of Boardwalk Empire. Hey, one of the things that we didn't talk much about was her ex-spouse, John Bischoff. I know that they had sort of an ignominious end to their relationship. And, she claimed that he helped frame her on a prostitution arrest back in the 1920s. Was he ever considered a serious suspect in her murder?
No, not at all. I mean, they never found any, apart from Vivian's suspicions and maybe perhaps paranoia about him. There was never any suspicion. The police really discarded him as a suspect very early on. He was an accountant. He used to work as an accountant for the the federal prison system. And, I mean, so he's going to team up with a New York City corrupt cop, a detective. It didn't hold water, and there was no evidence of that. He subsequently got custody of their daughter, Benita, because of the Vivian's dicey background. And ultimately, when Benita died, the daughter died, he took care of her disposition or funeral, whatnot. And he himself died a few years later, and probably about, I think it was 1936. So that's what happened to him. He was a guy, you wonder how he got involved with Vivian or how she got involved with him, given his, sort of decent, obscure kind of occupation. But it happened. Hey, and they had a kid.
Indeed, they did. It's always such a treat to talk with you, Tony DeStefano. Hey, I can't avoid asking you about the Gilgo Beach situation because you've been more involved than anybody in covering the arrest of Rex Heuermann and the subsequent superseding indictment of Rex Heuermann. I know a lot of our listeners have been following that case pretty closely. What's going on with the Gilgo Beach situation?
The Gilgo Beach case, for which we got an Emmy, by the way, back.
Congratulations.
Yeah. For a little documentary we did on the 10th anniversary. Anyway, the Gilgo Beach case currently now has Heuermann facing 6 homicide charges. He's possibly going to be charged in the 7th. We just don't know. But this case is in the massive discovery phase. There's massive discovery. There's DNA evidence, phone evidence, other evidence, search warrant evidence, and it's going on. And I suspect we won't see a trial, if there's going to be a trial, until 2025. It's a big case. You're talking 6 homicides. How do you defend that? How do you even try something like that? It's going to be a story that's going to stay with us, I think, for the immediate future and probably for a year or so down the road. What's going to happen? I don't know. Is it going to go to trial? 6 homicides you're going to be facing. That's a lot to defend against. And he has basically a court-appointed counsel. It's not like he has unlimited resources to hire, a major law firm.
Mm-hmm.
If there's anything wrong with his current counsel. But to defend these cases, and because you've seen some of these mob cases, it takes a lot of resources. And if you're going up the well-stocked and well-funded DA's office, you're going to have to really have assets. Now, I'm not sure Heuermann really has that kind of backing financial to defend this thing in a significant way. So I think there's going to have to be decisions down the road. Either they're going to sever the case, try 4 homicides by themselves, the first 4, the Gilgo 4, and then the other 2 later, or they're going to look at this case and say, well, is there any way to make a deal? I don't know. We're going to see. This is what makes it so interesting. The case is on in court next at the end of July, end of this month. And we'll know more about the discovery and what's going to happen. And it's a monster case, no doubt about it. And nobody thought it would be solved. Some people didn't think it would be solved, but they solved it. No, they think they solved it. So,
well, it's going to be interesting. That's for sure. If it goes to trial, that's going to be one for the ages. Absolutely. Hey, I hope people check out Anthony DeStefano's book, Broadway Butterfly, Vivian Gordon, the Lady Gangster of Jazz Age New York. Tony, it's always a treat to talk with you. Congratulations on the book. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank. And thank you. And, thank you, and continue on with your podcast and radio, and the best of luck.
Thank you, my friend. We'll do it again soon. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
If you want to comment on any portion of my discussion with Tony DeStefano, you can email me, frank.morano@wabcradio.com. That's frank.morano @wabcradio.com. If somebody sent you this podcast, do us a favor and please pass it on to a friend of yours and be sure to share it on social media. If you're not already doing so, please follow the podcast, The Racket Report. It's available in any podcast app. This way, whenever there's a new episode, it'll immediately be downloaded to your phone or your wireless device. Until the next time we meet in cyberspace, I'll see you on the radio.